down the open hole. It goes in the burrow.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We'll be starting our meeting. First order of business, rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. We will be interviewing 3 candidates for the upcoming vacant town administrator's job. Our first candidate is Ryan McNutt. I think the format will follow. We'll let the candidates give a little introduction, talk a little bit about themselves. Board members can ask some questions. Members of the public that may or may not be here can ask questions. Candidate can follow up with anything they have. We'll have a closing statement, and then we'll move on to our next candidate.
Right, and we had talked about the format we wanted to follow, and correct me if I'm wrong. The first interview you had with us was pretty thorough. This is the first opportunity people in town and employees will have the opportunity to hear you. So this is your time to sell yourself to us and to the town.
Right, and at the conclusion of the interviews, Board of Selectmen will do a ranking system. We may or may not announce the final candidate tonight, and we may or may not tabulate our rankings tonight. But the process will be we'll rank the candidates. If there's a consensus number 1, we will move on to the negotiation phase at some point, but we will announce it, and the public will be informed, as will the candidate.
And if we don't reach a consensus, what happens?
That's an interesting point. If we deadlock or we don't have a consensus, I guess we'll have to, one side will have to sway the other one, or I'm not sure where we go from there.
Okay.
Let's just get through these first, and then we'll decide.
So as I stated, first up is Ryan McNutt, and at this point, I will turn the floor over to Mr. McNutt. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the past 10 years, I have been a municipal manager, leader, and department head. Currently, I live in New Hampshire. I most recently was working in New Hampshire as a city manager, but I am from Massachusetts, and I long to return to Massachusetts. And both my wife and I would like to live near Worcester, but not in Worcester. So Dudley is a very, very attractive opportunity for me.
Perfect. So as Mr. Joseph stated, we had a pretty thorough interview with all the candidates. You know, we allotted an hour each, and I think every interview went over an hour. So I think we'll open up to board member comments or questions, and if Mr. Marcy would like to go first, we can go left to right, or we can go right to left.
Okay. Ryan, good to see you again. Thanks for coming, making the trip. Like I said, to Mr. Joseph, Mr. Sullivan's point, we had a pretty thorough interview with you before. So I think it's great, since we want to do this in public and people are watching and get to know you a little bit. I'll probably ask the fun question later again, but first, I want all the candidates to sort of, this is your chance to sell yourself, right, to us and to the town, right? So if you were the town administrator, what would your plan be, what would you do to start out creating a plan, and what sort of things would you work on in the first year?
That's a great question. So the first thing to do is to understand the folks that I'm going to be working with. So set up listening time for all of the department heads and the staff. I am a very approachable person. I like to make sure that folks are comfortable meeting with me. And then from there, I can get an understanding of what the staff's view of priorities are, and then sit down with yourselves and find out what goals and objectives you have. From there, I've formed some of my own thoughts based upon the research that I've done into Dudley. I know some things are progressing forward that I would like to see happen. Some of these things are up to town meeting, so it will be interesting to see how the residents in town vote on some of those things.
Let's be specific, though. What types of things would you like to sink your teeth into as part of the building the plan?
Well, I've worked, I've read the MRI report about the DPW proposal for reorganization. I believe that there's a very strong report that they did last year in 2018. I've worked under, right in my last position, all the town departments reported directly to me. I was the appointing authority, the chief executive. So I've managed departments of public works. I've also worked in towns that had separate, independent public works that reported to a separately elected commission. So I understand both organizational structures, but I believe considering some of the infrastructure challenges facing Dudley, my personal opinion is it would be beneficial to bring that into a department. I understand, you would retain the water and sewer enterprises and the water and sewer commissioners. That's fine. That works as well. That was in the report. But I've noticed that there has, for whatever reason, and I don't know the reasons, but there's been a significant lack of undertaking grant opportunities. And that's something that I would really like to work on. Probably lay the groundwork for that in the first year. Some of these types of grants are very competitive, and it would take a year to get the staff comfortable with being able to apply for them, recommend the specific projects. But definitely taking advantage of the grant opportunities in Massachusetts. It's one of the key reasons I want to come back to Massachusetts, because there's a wealth of support at the state level for cities and towns. And I've been very successful in my career when I was a town administrator in Massachusetts of taking advantage of those opportunities.
Good. Thank you, Ryan. Good answer. Shelley?
Brian, first off, thank you for your service in the military. Part of your experience in the city of Fitchburg as the chief of staff, and then subsequent to that, you became director of housing for the city of Fitchburg.
Correct.
What experience do you have, or how would you proceed? Like, one of the ongoing semi-white elephants in town is a Stevens Linen Mill. I believe the building dates to the mid-1800s. We've had several developers come in with plans of first affordable housing, then apartments. Can you give us a little bit of what's your experience, or do you have experience, like revitalization of old mills to conversion? And as a director of the housing, what can you do to help us, first off, develop some properties like that, help a developer, or reach our 10% cap for affordable housing?
That's a great question. Thank you. I have significant experience in creating affordable housing. In the city of Fitchburg is what's called a participating jurisdiction with HUD. So Fitchburg would get money directly from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I managed all of those federal grant funds for the city. And then we would work with the state. The counterpart to that at the state level, and what it would be for Dudley, is DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. They get the same HUD funds that the city of Fitchburg would get. So you can apply for those funds. They're called Community Development Block Grant Funding, and you can use that to create affordable housing and attract developers. And you can, you would work with area partners, seek a developer. In the city of Fitchburg, Fitchburg is a mill town, textile mill community, Nashua River, most of the mills right along the river. So we had a street that was becoming unsightly. It was a gateway into the city, so most of the folks that traveled into Fitchburg would have to travel down this road, and it created an impression, whether positive or negative, and we wanted it to create a positive impression. So we applied, as I was talking earlier about the state support and grant opportunities, we applied and received $3 million in MassWorks to be able to streetscape River Street. So clean up blighted properties, rebuild sidewalks, make things more walkable, ADA accessible, and at the same time, we used our housing funds and applied to DHCD and got more housing funds, so we leveraged our funding with them and worked with wind companies and created the most recent project that I had worked on just finally opened in 2017, and that is the Fitchburg Yarn Mill. It was 96 units of housing. My mission in Fitchburg is well over its 10% cap, so I tried to achieve a little bit more market rate housing in that project. So it was actually 60% market rate housing and 40% affordable. But that's a $22.4 million mill reconversion. In other instances, Fitchburg State University is a great asset for the city, and we tried to leverage that opportunity by being able to draw more students into the downtown to support commercial enterprise. And we had some mill buildings that were falling apart on Main Street near the university. So they were safety hazards, they were blighted, they were vacant. You can't really create affordable housing in that area and then segregate its availability just for students. So we took a different route, and I worked with some students at Fitchburg State to create the Student Housing Overlay District. And then I found some developers, and we turned 2 mills into private dormitories. And that has worked out brilliantly. And at the same time, we didn't use any state university money. That was completely a public-private partnership. But at the same time, you know, I worked to engage with the leadership of the university to get them to make some investments on North Street, which was the feeder street that we wanted those students to be able to go down and feel safe coming onto Main Street and partaking in the businesses in the downtown.
All right, just as a quick follow-up, 2 points. What you just talked about, there's an article in the paper today. There's a developer, I believe it's based out of Great Britain, that wants to do that in Boston. They're trying to build 51-week lease apartments, which they're going to use for students. So that's, I mean, I don't think Nichols has that student enrollment, but that's, I guess that's an ongoing trend. And I noticed you said "we" a lot in the beginning. We put in for a grant, we worked, and then you switched to "I." Did you do "we" because why'd you say "we" a lot in the beginning, and then you switched to "I"? Was it more collaborative? Was it more initiative-driven towards the end, the things you talked about?
I think I use the term "we" because when I come into work in a community, I'm the team, you know, that becomes the team. If I'm, you know, fortunate enough to be hired as Dudley's town administrator, that's it. It's Team Dudley. It's we. We're all pushing for the same thing, the betterment of Dudley. So when I worked in Fitchburg, it was we. So yeah, some things were very collaborative. I had great mentoring opportunities. Definitely the MassWorks on River Street and the mill project was that was a public partnership with wind companies. So I had to work with their staff. Their staff had to work with the city, which was my department. On the MassWorks River Street streetscaping project, that was a multi-departmental project. So my department applied for the MassWorks grant, but we also needed the Fitchburg DPW to do some of the work, because in a MassWorks grant, you have to have some skin in the game. So, but you can do in-kind. Not everything has to be taxpayer dollars. It can also be staff in-kind work. So we worked with the Department of Public Works to have them as a component contractor on the project.
So, one more quick. So at the end, when you said I met with the leadership, with the students. Was that a project, I guess I'm getting, that you drove? Was that your brainchild, or were you delegated as director from the mayor, or whomever may have said, you handle it?
Oh, definitely, I would say on the Student Housing Overlay District, that was more my brainchild. I led the effort in the city council. I led the effort. I wrote the zoning overlay, and got it passed through the city council. So, yeah, on that one, it was more of my baby, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Kerry?
Hi, again. Mine's just a quick two-part question. Through your research that you've done on Dudley, what do you think is Dudley's biggest strength, and what do you think is Dudley's biggest challenge?
I think Dudley's biggest strength is the very talented staff that you have, and also the stability that you guys have shown. I mean, I'm looking at the fact that you have a $13.50 tax rate, which I know you folks feel is quite high for you because it's up like $1.77, and that's kind of an aberration for you. But that's very impressive to be able to achieve that, considering that the town has not availed itself of some of the grant programs. I mean, for instance, Charlton just got a $2.6 million MassWorks grant to run its sewer line through Dudley to Webster. Oxford, the year before, got a $2.5 million MassWorks grant. So the fact that your staff and you folks have been able to keep this place affordable and as attractive a community as it is, that's a great strength. Some of the weaknesses I see are not trying to take advantage of those state programs, because the level that they're being funded at now, I mean, if off the top of my head, I believe the governor and the legislature are funding MassWorks to the tune of $600 million. There's only 351 cities and towns. I mean, if you have a shovel-ready project, if you've done the planning, they want to give you the money. It's a success for them. They count the same successes that you count. So some of the weaknesses that I see are aged infrastructure. On the 2018 economic development plan that you folks had done, the number 2 goal was to improve the city's water pipes and sewer infrastructure. That was recognized as the primary impediment to commercial and industrial development. So I guess the weaknesses are, if you want to grow the commercial tax base, we have to take that underground infrastructure seriously.
Thank you. Very good. No, that was a great
You
answer.
took my question.
You didn't have any notes. I was looking over your shoulder. I didn't see anything.
So, remembering this is the opportunity for you to sell yourself, I want to encourage you to demonstrate as much specificity as you can to your answers. Now, generally, the board wants this to be a positive experience. But that's not always me. So now, after a collective gasp from the other selectmen, let me ask you this question. Nobody's perfect. What criticisms have been leveled against you in the past? What are they? What have you learned from them? And the second part is, what things are we going to learn about you that we're going to need to ride over the humps with you when you get started?
No, that's a very fair and important question. I would say the criticisms that have been leveled at me in the past and the things that I take to heart and I'm trying earnestly to work on is that my approach, I can be a very forthright individual. I can be blunt. And sometimes I can come across as an engineer. And I'm not an engineer, but I'm a very detail-oriented person. I do a lot of preparation. I try to get a good command of the facts, and sometimes I move a little quick with that. So I would say that the criticisms that I have been received is that I need to slow down and appreciate the speed that everybody else is working at. And
All right, how did your attention to detail manifest itself in the research you did about our town?
well, I've read the 2000 master plan. I read the update, the 2018 economic development report. I've read the MRI study about the DPW, and I've read pretty much all of the media that I can about things that have happened in Dudley, and formed my views about how we might be able to move forward. At the same time, you know, I've also watched as many of your select board meetings as I had time to, and noticed that there's a lot of things that are being done well. There's a lot of things that I wouldn't change, that they should be sustained.
One of our major potentials, and it's key, and we've all talked about it many times, is the lack of commercial, and you alluded to it, the lack of commercial opportunities in our tax base. One of, if not the major challenge that would have significant impact would be to extend our commercial base out through West Dudley and up from the Four Corners in Quinnebog, Connecticut, up towards Southbridge. So my question is, if in fact we needed to come to an arrangement, no, number one, if we could come to an agreement with Quinnebog to run infrastructure through the very small portion of Connecticut that we would have to, from the Dudley Town Line through the Four Corners up into Southbridge, and if we could get funding or support from our state legislators, where could we get the funding? And I want to know with real specifics. Number one, where could we get the funding to do that? Two, what would it take for an inter-town, interstate agreement to get to go through Quinnebog? And what would you negotiate, and how would you negotiate it with the town of Southbridge in case we needed to connect sewer or water with them?
So first, we would look at the available parcels. You take an inventory of the available parcels and their conditions, and you find out what types of infrastructure they need. So if you're saying that they need water infrastructure and you need extra water capacity and that you want to negotiate with neighboring communities to do that, I have experience doing that. In the town of Lancaster, Massachusetts, to be able to develop North Lancaster, I started the process of entering into an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Lunenburg to buy 250,000 gallons of water a day, because that was the amount of water that would be needed to support the proposed developments in North Lancaster. So to be able to do intermunicipal agreements, you just need to have willing partners. Whether that is over a state line or not is not a barrier. It would be negotiating with that other community. You can and I have a history of working with state and federal legislators and state and federal programs. So there are some federal programs that support economic development. One of the other things that I noticed is, and I'm not sure if you attempted to get one last year when they were available from the federal government, this concept called opportunity zones. So part of Webster, a census tract district in Webster was designated as an opportunity zone. I believe there's 187 of them in 79 communities in Massachusetts. That is a new initiative from the Trump administration to try to attract investment dollars into underserved areas for economic development. I believe that this program is going to be very successful and that they're going to have another round of opportunities for communities to be designated as opportunity zones. So that's one access to funding that's available at the federal level.
Okay.
It's technically a public-private partnership because you create an opportunity zone fund and then you work with investors. They put their money in there and they get tax breaks for investing in those opportunity zones. At the federal level, there is also the Economic Development Administration, and I've worked with them as well. And if you have a project, they need to have a significant amount of planning already done. They kind of want to know that their money is going to be used wisely. But but their money is to be used to create jobs in commercial districts. So once you identify how many new employees, you put that into an application, what's called a Certified Economic Development Strategy, a CEDS, and you send that into them. And then those are just the federal programs. At the state level, again, there's MassWorks, there's Complete Streets program, there's a lot of different programs that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has, and again, they're usually looking for ways to be able to give communities that money, especially communities that have never gotten the money before. I think Dudley would be very primed for a MassWorks application because we've been underserved in the past.
And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I have one more question regarding grants. Chief, the fire chief is here. Chief, what is the total amount of money in grant money that you've received for the town since you've been fire chief? Just under 1.3 million. I mean, he leads the way. So my question about grants is, I want to know what grants you have personally initiated, whether at instruction or on your own, and what grants have you caused to be awarded to a community that you've served?
So in the city of Fitchburg, I spoke about the $3 million MassWorks grant that was used to do River Street. That was, again, something that I worked in conjunction with other staff, but at the direction of the mayor's office, which at the time I was the chief of staff and later the director of housing and development. Later, when I became the director of housing, the very first month into that position, the Attorney General of the Commonwealth at the time, Martha Coakley, had just received money from the tobacco settlement, and she put that out as unrestricted grant funds, and I got $250,000 right there.
That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know the I, as Chairman Sullivan mentioned, the distinction between the we and the I, and you've done that for me. Okay.
Yeah, as I spoke in our earlier interview, I'm somebody that likes to work very collaboratively with staff, and I like to give credit to other folks. It's rare that I try to self-aggrandize or take credit for things. I understand in this type of format, as you say, I'm supposed to be selling myself, so I will try to be more mindful of taking ownership of some of the things that I have initiated or directed to happen. But in every case, there were always other folks that I was working with that
We
deserve
understand
just
you
as
don't
much
work in a
credit.
vacuum, yep. Good, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
John, follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's asked the I and we question, so just a general. When we're just, I hope you caught the drift. I think what everybody's saying is when we say I, we don't have a lot of support staff to like write things or put things together. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, how comfortable are you with being really hands-on with budgets, with grants, with, name it?
I'm very comfortable. In many cases, I've done those things personally myself. I have a long history of writing grants personally. I've crafted I was personally responsible for the budget in Claremont, New Hampshire, which is approximately the same size budget as Dudley's $22 million budget. I'm very comfortable doing those things on my own if necessary.
Right, that's what I wanted to get to, because I just, some people might think that, okay, we have a low tax rate, which means, yes, we're a full-service town, we might have might not have some of the extras that you might be used to, so just wanted to.
Well, if I might take this opportunity to elaborate.
Sure.
I'm a very fiscally conservative person.
Yep. As are we, yeah.
The very first budget that I came to as the city manager, the chief executive officer of the city of Claremont, I directed all departments for a 5% cut. We cut $522,000 out of the budget. That was necessary to happen, and we did it.
Yep.
And nobody was laid off, but we were able to find those efficiencies. Like I said, I blanch at spending taxpayer money. If I don't have to, I don't.
Okay. One follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask what's my fun question, right? So for everybody, just to get to know you a little bit better, what's one thing that people might not know about you that's fun or interesting, or?
It probably is becoming apparent just from my, how folks are seeing me here. I'm a total nerd. But I'm not a total financial nerd. I'm actually I have been collecting Marvel comics, and I have a pretty extensive Marvel comics collection. In particular, I focus on 1962 I cut it off at 1994. After 1994, I don't care anymore. And Star Wars. I'm also a huge Star Wars geek.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
So, Ryan, I just have a comment and then a quick follow-up. You talked a little bit about infrastructure. Paul talked about infrastructure and how we have a problem reaching. It's not a remote part of town. It's remote from our economic center, but it's close to Southbridge. And one of the issues we have with our infrastructure is we're under DEP mandate how much water we can pump. And that's the biggest issue. We have an intermunicipal agreement with Webster, you may or not know, with the sewer treatment plant that we own, I think 17% of, which does not operate at full capacity. So sewer.
They're at 60% capacity.
Yeah, sewer is generally not the issue. It's what we can get for water, because the industry needs the sprinklers and things like that. So my follow-up was going to be, but I think you kind of answered it, was more on that collaborative. I really wanted to try to get my hands around the collaborative part of it, and John kind of touched on it. We don't have a big support staff here. Like, for example, our administrative assistant is ours and the town administrators. Most towns have two. Most towns have a full-time, like a finance department, and we have a treasurer collector, we have a 32-hour-a-week accountant. So it's a lot of, in a town our size, what we need is someone that can come in and be able to grasp a lot of the smaller roles that are filled somewhere else. But you answered the question, so I didn't have a chance to really ask it. No, it's okay.
Well, Dudley is a community of 11,500 people. Lancaster was a community of 8,500 people. So when I was the town administrator of Lancaster, it was either a similar size staff or less staff than what Dudley has. So again, I'm very used to doing a lot of these things on my own, or working on the professional development of staff to encourage them to get the training, cross-training, so that more folks can do more things, and they appreciate that. It builds their resumes, they feel better about themselves, it gets them more opportunities to shine. There's more to the water issue than just negotiating an intermunicipal agreement. As you say, you're under DEP mandate. So that was also one of the challenges that we faced in Lancaster. And some of it is you can't increase your water withdrawal until you meet certain benchmarks that they want to see happen. And that was also in both the MRI report about the Public Works Department here. And again, I believe that the Public Works Department is doing a great job. They are doing a brilliant job, you know, for what, you know, Dudley, the size of the town of Dudley, and the tax rate. I mean, for the budgets that they have, the MRI report was, you know, very cognizant of the fact that they've kept the costs low. I mean, the water rates and stuff are lower than the surrounding communities. That's very impressive. But one of the very key things is what's called I&I, inflow and infiltration. And DEP likes to see that under 10% in a community. When I started in Lancaster, it was at 50%. We got it down to 25%. But we were also taking the right progressive steps to try to get it to under 10%. And, you know, we made DEP aware of the proactive efforts that we were taking, and they would allow us to increase our water withdrawal limit, in addition to taking in the water from Lunenburg. So, you know, getting the grant money and doing some of those infrastructure upgrades is one thing, but having an asset management plan, looking at these things through, you know, how can we better control that inflow and infiltration and get that down to the number that DEP wants to see is the better sort of respect that we'll get from the state.
Which, by the way, the Water Sewer Commissioners have just implemented their I&I.
Yep. They're working on that.
Working on that, yeah.
Kerry?
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Honestly, I would like to see myself sitting over in the chair that Greg was sitting in 5 years. I want to still be in Dudley. I believe some of these things are going to take some time to do.
Okay, fair enough.
You haven't alluded to your collective bargaining, hands-on collective bargaining experience. Could you illuminate us about that?
I have lots of boots on the ground experience with collective bargaining. Claremont has 4 public collective bargaining units: police, fire, public works, clerical. You folks, I believe, also same thing. 3?
No clerical union.
Oh, okay, even better. That's actually a very good sign. That's another very positive sign. Clerical unions usually develop when staff within the administration is concerned about their jobs and upset. So the fact that you don't have one means that folks are probably, you know, happy about their jobs. But I've negotiated collective bargaining agreements. I've been part of a public sector union myself. When I was in the city of Fitchburg, I was in the specialty skills and managers. I was the vice president of that union, so I've sat on both sides of the table. Yeah, I mean, if you have more specific questions, I have lots of collective bargaining experience.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody have a follow-up comment? Chief, you're the only member of the public. Anything you want to add? You want to come up? Or? Okay. So I think at this point, we'll give Ryan a chance to
Yeah,
summarize.
now it's your turn, right. Your turn to ask us
Closing
any
statement.
questions.
No questions, yeah. Any
Or questions?
Any questions you want.
Well, my main question, I mean, what I'm looking for is I believe what I found in Dudley is a politically stable community that is looking to take the proactive steps to keep their community sustainable and competitive. If you folks, and watching your board meetings, it seems like you folks have been satisfied with Mr. Balyakonis's service as the town administrator. Is that the type of interaction that you'd like to see sustained? What are you really looking for from your town administrator as you, the Board of Selectmen? Because this is very different from being a city manager. You guys are the chief executives. I would just be your agent, the chief administrative officer.
Well, I can't speak for the whole board, but I think since I've been on the board, I served under an interim administrator, we had a 7-year administrator, we had Mr. we had another interim, we had Mr. Balconis. I think we want to, as we discussed at the previous interview, we have strong chiefs in our public safety sector. We don't have a DPW, so we'll say highway for now. You know, we made it clear to the chiefs, they run their department. You know, they don't need to call one of us if, you know, they're buying a tire for a truck. But we ask them to keep Greg in the loop. They're very proactive with Greg. Greg's very proactive. I think going forward, we would like to see that continue. As we discussed in our other interview, there's departments that don't report to us technically, but we expect our administrator to not only be our voice, but be our voice to us when he steps in with a department that may not report to him. So we're looking for a leader, someone to keep us moving. We feel like we've been moving forward. You alluded to the $1.77 tax increase, and I'm probably going to use the wrong number, but something like $1.56 was the school override money. So we have to work with the schools. We have a 2-town district, so our administrator is a strong voice for us at school committee meetings. Some of us attend when we can, joint finance meetings. So I guess we're looking for someone, never going to get the same person twice, we know that. But someone who's proactive as opposed to reactive, someone who's a leader, who can either have a proven track record like you have, or can create their track record here. But to be that person where the fire chief can come to you and close the door and you guys can hash it out if there's a problem, it doesn't filter out into the public. I'm only saying that because he's here. You know, we want someone that's proactive that can go to the fire chief and say, hey, listen, I haven't talked to you in a couple of days, what's going on? If that seems to be an issue. So it's a so-called weak administrative position, but we've always treated it more as a strong.
I believe at your April 8th meeting, it was yourself that said, we've always said, let the TA lead. I'm absolutely comfortable being a leader. I'm somebody that I've made a concerted effort to be able to give direction, but also take direction.
Can't ask more than that. John, your feelings?
Yeah, I mean, everything Steve said, also just the little things, right? Like not letting anything fall off the table. You know, sometimes we have a long list of laundry list of items that, you know, leave it up to the town administrator to prioritize, but make sure everything does get done, so things don't drag on into yet another month, or, all right, that initiative that somebody wanted to do that we thought was a good idea, you know, follow through, I guess.
Carry
Yeah,
on.
and,
Sorry.
oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, no.
Oh, sorry.
No, you can respond.
No.
No, respond.
Well, going back to Mr. Joseph's, you know, what, you know, things might other communities that I've worked in say about me, and I said, perhaps, you know, the feedback that I've got is sometimes I come across as this, you know, stiff engineer personality.
I'm an engineer, so be careful.
No, I appreciate it.
You are?
I kind of took it as a
Bad.
compliment, but
I'm
I know it
stiff.
wasn't intended to be a compliment. I'm a very detail-oriented person, and I take great pride in my administrative ability to not let those things slip through the cracks, but also be strategic and forward-thinking. You know, for example, some of the things that I've been looking at, you know, listening to Mr. Balconis the other night talk about the FY20 budget and the fact that the total new revenue is, you know, approximately $420,000, and that has to be used across all the departments and services. And again, you know, I don't mean some of the things that I'm saying as a criticism of anyone, but these are things that I've recognized. The roof replacement project, that didn't need to happen. That's $350,000 that didn't need to be spent. I mean, some of these things are sort of, they're low-hanging fruit in a sense, that if you have somebody who is paying attention, and like I said, I'm not saying Greg wasn't or whatever, I know the building...
From before his time, he had
right,
to deal
exactly,
with it, yeah.
right, right.
Right.
But I also fully certified in Massachusetts as a chief procurement officer. I've taken all of the classes that the Inspector General offers, and I've managed municipal building projects, multi-million-dollar municipal building projects. The Prescott Building, which is now the Town Hall of Lancaster. that was my project. I was the manager on that project. That had been stalled for 4 years before I came into Lancaster. I got that started up and finished it for them. I managed the 2015 winter storm impact to the Thayer Memorial Library in Lancaster, which is one of the hearts and souls of their community. I mean, that library is cherished by them, and it's a building from 1880. It's a very historic, delicate structure, and they had severe roof damage from that very heavy winter that we had in 2015. And I managed that as an emergency procurement project. Meant that, I had the ability to, short circuit certain procedures in contracting, but I also had the experience to know how to do that and not get taken for a ride by contractors. So those are also some of the strengths that I can bring, that, some things have been done, but going forward, not letting them happen again.
Gary?
I'm good.
Paul?
I want to answer your question. What do we expect? What can you expect from us? My advice, and it is advice, is very simple. Earn the trust you want. Earn it. Earn the respect. Give respect. And then the second thing is, know what you can do. Say what you're going to do, and then do what you say. It's really that simple. We're an intelligent, articulate, reasonable, but demanding board. If you can live with that kind of board, then you have a future here.
Sounds good to me.
I'm sorry.
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Anything else, Ryan?
No, unless you wanted to open it up. I don't know if the fire chief had any questions.
Come on up, chief, please.
I didn't before, but you mentioned the roof, so the roof was so bad that water was pouring in on the 3rd floor, so we didn't have any choice but to fix it. So I guess my question is, how could you fix it without, maybe I misunderstood your response.
No, I mean, I didn't mean it that specific project. I just meant that the initial contracting where a company came in and it's supposed to be a 30-year roof and it didn't last that long, and then it was discovered that it was improperly installed. The initial contracting and procurement may not have had, the full scrutiny. And I'm just saying that, and again, I wasn't here. I don't know who did that project. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions. I was just trying to use it as an example that is a strength that I do bring to the table, that I have managed municipal projects. I've done multi-million-dollar levels of contracting, especially for the preservation of historic structures or the construction of municipal buildings. So in the initial procurement, say we were doing this municipal project today, similar to your fire station, which I understand is coming along brilliantly and doesn't, I mean, it has a couple of issues, but those are issues that, anybody would have faced. There was dirty soils under the building and things like that. But that's an area where I have a lot of experience, is what I sort of meant, and that I can help Dudley avoid costly mistakes that take taxpayer dollars and they don't need to happen.
I mean, I'm pretty sure, I think I'm agreeing with you. It's just, as you know, having all the experience in Massachusetts that you have, there's, and I don't agree with the laws, but there's a lot of nonsense that you have to pay for, so it's like a good amount of your money is spent before a shovel even hits the ground because of all these, you know, prevailing wage and all those things. I don't agree with it, but it sounds like I'm agreeing with you because you could go the next state over right down the road and build the same building for like a third of the price.
Oh, yeah, there is absolutely foolish regulations but you have to work within that system. And what I'm saying is that having experience within that system and knowing what to look for, I mean, especially dealing with contractors and contracts, you can save yourself some pain and suffering. Sometimes, again, like I say, on the fire station project, I completely understand. There's no way you can know about buried tree stumps or dirty soils that are underneath the building. I've actually faced that in a project in the past as well. You got to bite the bullet and pay for those things. But, for example, if there is another site and we know it's dirty, there is brownfields money that you can apply for. And then that's not, I mean, it still takes the time, but it's not directly Dudley taxpayer dollars that are being used to abate that environmental hazard.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Chief. All right, Ryan, well, on behalf of the board and the town, we want to thank you for your interest, for coming in, giving, my opinion, 2 strong interviews, and that's why you're a finalist. So we thank you.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to be a finalist, and I've had a great experience with the 4 of you, and I would really look forward to working in Dudley. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ryan.
Ryan. You want to have Fred do
Hey,
5 minute, just